Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month's theme has been remembering our lessons, which can mean many different things when you're undergoing change, when you're, whether it's good change or it is something that gives you stress or, dare I say, a lot of uncertainty. The beginning of this month in the United States is 4th of July. It's our celebration of the passage of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. I also mentioned then a year before that, just 1 year and 1 day, July 5th, 1775, the Continental Congress attempted to express hope of reconciliation with the British. At the time, King George III refused, and here we are today with the United States. These major decisions, which may not have seemed major, made a big impact on what was to come. And some of the lessons we may have learned during that time may still be lessons we can learn today. However, there's also other notable things that happened in July 16th, 1969. Apollo 11 lunar landing mission began and lifted off Kennedy Space Center at 9:37 a.m. Another notable for me is in July 27, 1953. It was the end of the Korean War, which, it was just a month prior, and it was in June 25th when it was first. When the war first started. It has impacted families that were separated for about 74 years. So, and also when we think about all this, it's July, and one thing that sometimes we can get distracted, but one thing that is apparent is that we are changing. Each one of us maybe not changing that is noticeable, but it is something that we inevitably face as we grow older. Whether we like it or not, it happens. Change can also be a way for us to adapt and implement the things we've learned. I think Martin Luther King said this way. I read, I remember mentioning this quote several years ago, but it still holds a lot of weight to me. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. This motion. Today, I will be focusing on the change through adversity, which may include, health, mental health, substance use, values, and all that. And we've heard different perspectives from different people this month. Today I will be wrapping up this month with some of my insight on some of my lessons, the things I've learned, what I've seen, the things I'm doing now, the things I've done in the past. Disclaimer: if you are in crisis in the United States, 988 is a suicide crisis lifeline, so I encourage you to find if you're in crisis and you're in the States, please call that number or just get help. I don't like reinventing the wheel, so if you start feeling like you need help, get help. Especially it's hard for us adults. As we continue on this, I want to say, I always start off with quotes. I've been using proverbs, some world proverbs around the world. The Swedish proverb comes to mind. I said, those who wish to sing always find a song. I always like the mention of the song. A lot of times, when I think about music, there's a lot of dynamics. You talk about volume, you talk about tone, and there's also the melody and the harmony. And I like the idea that sometimes life can be expressed as a song as you meet people who enter your life and unfortunately leave your life or for whatever circumstances. So, but in this proverb kind of shows that we all have kind of a story. We all have those who wish to sing a song always find a song. So I do find that when we think about our lessons, at least when I think about, it's a lot about reflecting. Steve Jobs says it this way: your time is limited. Don't waste it living someone else's life. I think a lot of times, at least from my perspective, and this is just my perspective, even though I work in the mental health field, this is separate from that. I do feel that we try to create artificial certainty. There's a lot of uncertainty, and I think things are a little bit expressed or mentioned, or we experience things a little bit more vividly. Before, we weren't as connected. Now there's just a saturation of information and very little understanding. So, at least from my perspective, I feel that there is a danger to try to live someone else's life, especially if it feels more appealing than your own. And that's what comes to mind. A lot of times we don't allow context to seep in to any given situation. So even though someone may seem successful, if I really break it down, what is success for me, it may look very different from what the person's life that I'm looking at. So like I said, context, at least in my perspective, it has played an important part. Support and the type of support are important when you understand the context of the individual maybe you're trying to help. I know last month was post-traumatic stress. We're emphasizing that, attribute to that. A lot of combat vets, a lot of people come back from the military. But a lot of times the context doesn't match. A lot of times the bravest thing may be just to stay alive. An unknown quote says it this way: if you want to show me that you really love me, don't say that you would die for me. Instead, stay alive for me. So it's just context-wise, sometimes the bravest thing is to stay alive. Sometimes the bravest thing is to ask for help. Sometimes the bravest thing is to admit that you don't know what you're doing. Henry Ford says it this way: whether you think you can or you think you think you can't, you're right. Perspective, how we see ourselves, really, I find makes a big impact on the approach and the direction we may end up in. There's definitely wisdom sliced in there, and definitely some lessons we can learn from that. And when I say all these quotes, they're not finite. It's gonna be different, the context, where you're from, background, what's more important, what is purpose, what is your priority. Ghanaian proverb says, hunger is felt by a slave and hunger is felt by a king. It just shows that we are all susceptible to the same needs. Sometimes when we go to the derivative of what we're really feeling, we can get deeper what's really going on. I mentioned a lot of times we have this habit, or at least I've seen personally, if something doesn't go, at least seemingly didn't go right, and then you find out it went right, and you were maybe disproportionately upset or impacted by the idea is whoa, I was lucky. I dodged a bullet, per se. I thought this person was maybe unloyal, and you find out that was just your own quote unquote mind playing tricks on you. At least for me, what I try to do for myself is to not let that thing go. So I asked myself, well, why did it get that far? Why did I get so upset? I journal. Sometimes I do breathing techniques. Sometimes I do some progressive relaxation when it comes to a combination of my breathing techniques. Sometimes I just reflect on why that was. I find that this is helpful, for at least for me, because I gain a lesson and understanding a little deeper than just I was lucky. Well, from my vantage point, I'm lucky to have the opportunity to learn something, especially that I don't have to I don't have to adjust quickly to the changing environments. I was wrong, and in this instance that I'm wrong, I'm allowed to at least find a little bit more about myself and why let's say this thing was so unnerving and made me feel so unrested or unbalanced. So there is that. A lot of times when I think about lessons, unfortunately, we learn lessons when we learn, I guess, our mortality, I guess, and that's obviously this podcast is not about proselytizing. So we all have, in this plane of existence, we are human, and we will end up dying. And as you grow older, it could be your parents, it could be your grandparents. So eventually, in essence, I'm talking about grief and how that impacts us. I think C.S. Lewis says it in a very kind of poetic, but at least for me, it was digestible. He says it, no one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I'm not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning, I keep on swallowing. It's just such a descriptive sensation, feeling when you are going through grief. And I do encourage those who are struggling. Maybe you have lost someone, or if it can to that 988 number. If you like I said, start with the groups that you're around. If it's some emergency, don't just brush it off. But grief is a big thing. It's definitely something that shouldn't be ignored. At least I encourage not to be ignored. One thing I've noticed, at least the hardest thing I've was speaking to people, especially when they get older and their spouse dies, the hardest thing they say they have to adjust to is cooking for one person. And it's something really basic, very simple, but very sad when you think about that notion. Now, moving on, and I'm thinking also about what C.S. Lewis talks about grief, but also not trying to skim or move forward too quickly. But there was one time when I used to use untranslatable words, and there's one that comes to mind as I kind of preface and kind of wrap this month up. I do want to say it is definitely humbling to have guests come on from all walks of life, and I do not encourage per se, but I am very humbled that they are willing to share a bit about themselves. A lot of times we don't really we take advantage. Well, we don't really think of being I don't know, vulnerability as being brave. That's why I do feel very much that those who do come on are in essence why I do this podcast, to give a voice. Me, my own experience having mental illness for several decades, and understanding how isolated one can feel. Being heard was definitely an element. That's why I've seen at times support groups being very helpful. But it's incredible how much you can humanize a person just by hearing them. I don't know, it's kind of reflective now that I'm working in the field, but I remember some of the most supportive moments being one when I was very ill was not of a solution to some tangible problem, or not some great idea. It was more about feeling like I was still belonged somewhere. There's this Welsh word is harath, a homesickness for somewhere you cannot return to, the nostalgia and grief for the lost places of your past, places that never were. A lot of times, especially mental health, I could tell you personally that I felt that I lost a lot. I think I lost a lot of years. I lost a lot of time spending on getting stable. And I just remember certain points in my life, and I want to share this as we kind of wrap up. I was leaving the military. I was already experiencing some symptoms, and I remember coming back after 2000. I served from 2000 2004, and I remember just going to a support group and just being bitter, completely bitter, because I'm like, these people are, they're complaining about curfew, they're complaining about not being able to play games as much, and for me, I wasn't willing to listen to the context. I was only feeding into my biases, and I just felt you spoiled individuals. I was so upset. At the same time, I was also a hypocrite because I felt, if this is these are the people that are going to be the ones who are sick with me. I don't want to be sick, so I ignore a lot of times my symptoms. I moved on. I tried the best I could until I couldn't. I remember later on, speed up, not that, I don't know, about 10 years ago or whatever, started doing support groups again with a different perspective, different lens. And one of them asked me, do you want to be a facilitator? And I said to myself, oh no. And but I ended up doing it. And I would say that was one of the stepping stones to really a big part of my healing, and part of that was forgiving myself, forgiving the situation. The bitterness didn't help me per se. So what I felt I lost, the homesickness and nostalgia, the grief that I lost, the places that I could never be, were actually holding me back. Now I couldn't see myself do anything else but work with those who are struggling like I was. And for me, it's been really healing and rewarding. What lessons have you seen work for you or others regarding life, inevitable change that we are all subjected to? I'll say it this way, it's kind of simple. I could have a great plan or a great idea for a client I'm working with. However, if it's not their plan or they're not part of it, most times I haven't seen it worked. And also, one thing that's strange also, we always think about the tangible, noticeable growth. But I do find, and I do contribute to the idea that it's the micro things. It's the little things, showing up today, waking up today. So sometimes the progress, unfortunately, is very slow. However, it's the habits that build us to those goals, and I try to remind, and at least it has been helpful for me, and when I'm working with people, to learn to find a way to enjoy the process. And how do I enjoy the process of healing? Well, find something that you can cathartically dive into. And it's being creative with the problems that are in front of you. Other lessons I think I've learned was being intentional with those who you are connected with. I'll break it up. Being intentional with those who you're connected with. So I don't just assume, and I said this before in other podcast episodes, I don't assume that someone just knows that I appreciate them. Nowadays, I don't. I feel there's a little bit more isolation, a little bit more loneliness out there. So I do find that just taking a moment and just out of the blue, no intention needed, but just to say, I appreciate you, a friend or whatever, and putting yourself out there, being vulnerable. I know it's kind of unorthodox, but I found that I've been positively received. Another thing I would also say is I think it is kind of hard for us to do, especially if someone's very close to you. But it goes back to the first thing. I know what may work for me. I may, in the general sense, I may know what may work for someone that may help improve their lives, maybe help, especially when it comes to tangible needs. But I do encourage those who are struggling, the families who are helping support, include the person who is struggling, unless various situations where the person is unable to. But if the person is part of the problem solving, I always say, work the problem. Sometimes that's all you can do, is just work the problem. I would encourage participation. Person might have failed 15 times, so eventually, at least from my experience, that most of these goals, most of these things that they want to achieve when it comes to success, really stems from them participating in it. So what other ways you can humanize the individual? That's why a lot of times, like last few months, but I would say in May speaks to me, remembering our names. Names are very much a huge part of who we are, and is our identity. And I do feel that can be a big way of supporting someone. You may not have the funds, you may not feel that you want to hand out money or make it, you don't want to do it for your son or daughter, but you want them to be better. And it is difficult because you want to help, but you also know you're not going to be there all the time to help. I feel that this narrow way really stems from a lot of conversations. So, I guess my last bit of what I've seen is start those conversations. Don't think about what other people, whether they're starting the conversation with their sons or daughters, whether the conversation seems like it's taking too long. Remember why you're doing this. Like, it is inconvenient. It is maybe a big struggle to connect, but I would encourage to find ways to address it, not ignore it, not to ignore it, not to coddle the individual. I think, especially when it comes to mental health, and I'm not saying for all cases, I encourage active participation. Also, just have those hard conversations. Doesn't mean that you're gonna roll over, but and it doesn't mean that giving back dignity is just, I'm gonna agree with everything you say. It's mean that we're equals. That means that I'm more than willing to say I don't agree with you, but in essence, that makes me feel, at least in the context of this, makes me feel that the person's really listening to me, not just saying yes to everything I'm saying. So there's a nuance to that. So I do want to encourage that part of it. And then, as we wrap up, why do you think that remembering our lessons is important for us today? Well, for various reasons that I pointed out. I think remembering, we can get lost in the task portion of our brain on how to solve XYZ, but don't forget the human element, the person you are trying to help. And why do I think this is important? Because it's never the information age, I guess, in essence, that we have so much information there, we're not a bunch of ones and zeros. I encourage you to be creative in the way you solve problems, but also I think with so much information, we may forget or not remember the lessons we may have learned. So reflection, taking time aside to take that time aside. Nothing will change if nothing changes, that kind of concept. And as a final thought, I would like to say, remember, our lessons it's a continual process. So I do feel if there's a degree of forgiveness to oneself, those who are around you, family members, they may not understand you, and most likely they won't understand what's going on. Expectation levels to be at a level that is spoken openly, and also at the same time getting help when you need it. Like I said in the beginning, if you are in crisis, if you feel that you're not sure if you're safe today, I do encourage you to find help. If you're outside the United States, find what resources are in your community. Tell someone. Like I said, context is different, so you may think, oh, I'm just such a this shouldn't happen, or this stuff. Well, it is, and if sometimes we get hung up on where we're at, but maybe the bravest thing you can do is to ask for help. So I encourage those who are listening, watching, if you are struggling, get the help. And I want to, as we wrap up, I want to also reiterate to stay updated with Revive Ministries through various platforms. ReviveMinistriesFL.com is our website. Leaving with the last quote is a French proverb. I've said this before, but I'm just say it again. It says, Good advice is often annoying. Bad advice never